Picture this for a second. It's not the clean, black and white version of World War II you see in textbooks. It's not neat uniforms and straight battle lines. It's mud up to your knees. Smoke so thick you can barely breathe. And the constant rattle of gunfire echoing off broken buildings. You're not thinking about politics or treaties or what's approved. You're thinking about one thing only. Making it through the next 5 minutes alive. And that's exactly where the rulebook starts to fall apart. Because on paper, every army had standards. Approved weapons. Official gear. Things stamped, cataloged, and issued nice and proper. But the battlefield didn't care about paperwork. When a machine gun nest had your squad pinned behind a stone wall. When an enemy bunker was 10 feet away and pouring fire straight down your throat. Those neat little regulations suddenly felt very far away. That's when whispers started spreading among the troops. Not about new rifles. Not about secret tanks. About grenades. The ones you weren't really supposed to have. Some of them were pulled from supply because they were too dangerous. Others were labeled unstable, experimental, or quietly banned after commanders decided the damage they caused was just too extreme. Even for war. A few even brushed up against early international agreements about unnecessary suffering. On reports, they sounded clinical. Unreliable fuse. Excessive fragmentation. Incendiary risk. Quote. But to the men on the ground, those same flaws sounded like advantages. Take certain early fragmentation grenades. Instead of controlled shrapnel. These things shattered into hundreds of jagged metal shards that didn't just wound. They tore through anything nearby. Walls, doors, bodies. The blast radius was unpredictable. Dangerous for the thrower, too. High command hated them. Too messy. Too many friendly injuries. So they phased them out. But soldiers who had actually seen one go off inside a bunker, they remembered something different. They remembered silence afterward. No return fire. Then there were the incendiaries. Phosphorus and thermite devices that didn't just explode. They burned. White-hot flames that stuck to surfaces and kept burning even underwater. Officially, they were for signaling or destroying equipment. Unofficially? Toss one into a fortified room, and everything inside either ran, or didn't come out. Commanders worried about optics. About legality, about what it looked like if captured troops talked. So they restricted them. But if you were the guy ordered to clear that room, suddenly that restricted grenade sounded like the best friend you ever had. And it wasn't just factory-made stuff. Some of the most feared explosives weren't even standard issue at all. Improvised sticky bombs packed with extra explosives. Grenades modified with tighter fuses. Makeshift charges built from spare parts and pure desperation. Engineers and frontline troops tinkered constantly, turning basic explosives into something far nastier. Technically unauthorized. Definitely against regulations. But terrifyingly effective. The truth is, war zones became testing grounds. Soldiers figured out fast what worked and what didn't. If something saved lives, it didn't matter whether some officer miles away had stamped it, approved. Quote. So quietly, these banned grenades never really disappeared. They just stopped being official. A guy might keep one stuffed at the bottom of his pack. Another would trade cigarettes for one. Sometimes a crate that was supposed to be destroyed just accidentally never made it back. Nobody asked too many questions. Because everyone knew. When you're clearing trenches or moving house to house in a bombed-out city, standard gear doesn't always cut it. Sometimes you needed something louder. Meaner. Something that ended the fight fast. Even if it scared you a little to hold it. That's the part people don't talk about much. These grenades weren't just brutal to the enemy. They were dangerous to carry. Bad fuses. Sensitive triggers. One wrong bump and you might not get a second chance. Every time you slipped one into your pocket, you were basically trusting a tiny metal ball filled with explosives not to betray you. But soldiers still kept them anyway. Because between a risky grenade in your hand, or certain death behind the next corner, that didn't feel like much of a choice at all. And that's how these so-called forbidden weapons survived. Not in warehouses or official inventories, but in the quiet, unspoken decisions of the men who knew that sometimes the only way to make it home was to use something the rulebook said you shouldn't even have. By the time you'd been at the front for a few weeks, something changed in you. The speeches stopped mattering. The medals. The regulations. All that stuff that sounded important back at training camp started to feel distant. Almost imaginary. Out here, The only thing that felt real was the next burst of gunfire and whether you were still breathing when it stopped. That's why the idea of banned weapons didn't land the way commanders thought it would. Because from a safe office miles behind the lines, banning a grenade made sense. It was about policy, about safety reports, about what looked acceptable on paper. But from inside a trench with dirt falling on your helmet and enemy troops 20 yards away, it felt ridiculous. Out here, approved didn't mean effective. And restricted didn't mean useless. It usually meant the opposite. Imagine moving through a shattered town in Europe, buildings split open like broken teeth. Your squad is clearing houses one by one. Every doorway could hide a rifle. Every staircase could be your last. You toss a standard grenade into a room. Wait for the bang. Rush in, and there's still someone shooting back because the blast just wasn't enough. That's how guys got killed. So when someone whispers, "Hey, I've got one of those phosphorus grenades left," nobody says no. Nobody asks if it's allowed. Because they've seen what it does. They've seen it hit the floor and burst into blinding white fire. Flames licking up walls, oxygen getting sucked right out of the room. Terrifying. Overkill. Exactly what you want when the alternative is your buddy catching a bullet through the doorway. It wasn't cruelty. It was math. One grenade, or one funeral. The same thing happened with those old unstable fragmentation types. Officers called them hazards because the shrapnel spread too wide. But to the guy about to assault a bunker, too wide sounded perfect. He didn't want precision. He wanted certainty. He wanted everything inside that concrete box to stop moving. So he'd save that grenade like it was gold. Not for everyday use. For emergencies. For that moment when things went bad and you needed something that didn't just scare the enemy. It erased the problem. And yeah, there were risks. Everybody knew someone who got hurt by a faulty fuse or a grenade that cooked off too fast. These weren't clean, reliable factory tools. Some were old. Some modified. Some basically homemade. You carried them and you felt it in the back of your mind the whole time. This thing could take me out too. But that fear got weighed against a bigger one. Getting overrun. There's this brutal honesty that settles into soldiers after enough combat. You stop pretending war is fair. You stop believing there's always a right way to fight. All you care about is bringing your people home. So squads started bending the rules together. A sergeant might forget to confiscate something. A supply guy might look the other way. Engineers would quietly hand over an improvised charge and just say, "Don't ask." Quote. It became this unspoken system. Officially, the grenades didn't exist. And officially, everybody knew exactly who had one. And when things got desperate, that's when they came out. One toss into a tunnel. One roll down a stairwell. One throw into a machine gun nest that had been chewing up your platoon for 10 straight minutes. Boom. Silence. And in war, silence is everything. Afterward, nobody celebrated how nasty it was. Nobody bragged about it. They just exhaled, checked on each other, and kept moving. Because it wasn't about being ruthless. It was about survival. About protecting the guy next to you. That's the part people miss when they hear banned weapons. It sounds sinister, like soldiers were going rogue or trying to be brutal for the sake of it. Most of the time, it was the opposite. It was fear. It was desperation. It was a 19-year-old kid thinking, if this ugly little grenade gives me even a slightly better chance of seeing home again, I'm keeping it. Regulations didn't hug your family. Policies didn't drag wounded friends out of buildings. But sometimes, a so-called forbidden grenade did. And that's why. No matter how many memos got written or how many boxes were supposed to be destroyed, these weapons never truly disappeared. Because when the shooting started and everything went sideways, survival beat the rulebook every single time.